welcome for 806ers. Last week we spoke about those initial decisions you have to make to get to a refined idea for your research proposal. Now today I will talk you through the main sections of your proposal of the portfolio, and I will do this by referring to 3 examples of how this whole thing can fit together. Now we don't have time and I don't have the space on screen to show you the details of these examples I'll be referring to, but I also uploaded a document on my UNISA that gives you a more detailed indication. It's compiled in a table format, almost like your analysis tables of assignment 2. So go and have a look under the support material for the examination portfolio. You will find it there. But the 3 examples, the first one is an example of a non-profit context within the field of public relations or the area of donor relations and fundraising, that type of example. It's a fictional organization, Urban Crop Community. Remember, you have to use a real one, but I just used Urban Crop Community from a past module. Then the second example is a decolonial critical analysis of employee relations in the construction industry. Here the organizational focus is more on an industry than on one specific organization. And then the third example is about Absa's Africanacity campaign as a branding or a positioning campaign, and Black Twitter in relation to that campaign. Now, all right. Of course, your very first section of your portfolio will be the introduction. As you hopefully know by now, an introduction should tell your reader what you are presenting in the document that follows and start the golden thread of your whole argument. For your introduction, write a paragraph where you state that this is a proposal for a research project about this, that, and the following. Give your topic in short so that your reader knows exactly what is coming. Also, provide an outline of the sections that follow. You will get some nice idea about different ways to write introductions if you revisit those articles you analyzed for assignment 2, or if you focus a bit on how other researchers introduce their journal articles or their writing pieces. Now, after the introduction, your first real content section is the field of specialization or the domain of practice. Now, this section is for 15 marks, and you will be required to write something between 15 and 30 sentences, or 1 or 1.5 pages in length, just to give you a general impression of the volume of work you are supposed to produce here. Then we give you such clear instructions on what to include here. You must just adhere to the requirements in the 101. So you have to give an overview of organizational communication. You have to select your field of specialization, domain of practice, area of interest, those type of terms that your topic belongs to, and you must discuss this field or domain briefly. Now let's quickly look at the examples. I made some notes here next to the logos. So for the urban crop community example, the field is public relations, because donor relationships, fundraising efforts, and so on. If you are in the non-profit sector, then these communication efforts are somewhat public relations like, because it is the strategic management of stakeholder relations. If you remember PRISA's definition of what public relations is, you will understand how donor relations fit into this bigger field. Then for the construction industry one, the field is organizational communication. Maybe you remember from Barker and Angelopoulos or Angelopoulos and Barker is the newer version, we call our big discipline organizational communications. But within this discipline, there's also a field called organizational communication. And that field is sometimes used when we refer to internal matters, employee matters, in organizational settings. So it's almost internal communication. And that is why issues of employee relationships are part of internal communication and can be seen as this area of what we can also refer to as organizational communication as a field within the bigger organizational communication discipline. Then the Absa example, here the field is branding or branding communications, and the area or the smaller domain of practice is customer relationships or customer feedback, because that is the focus of this specific example. You'll see more in the topic section. The next section is about the topic and the contextualization of your topic. Again, you are looking at a section of 15 marks, so 15 to 30 sentences, 1 to 1.5 pages. Now, for this section, we again give you a very clear idea of what needs to be in here. In the first place, you must give a 1-sentence summary of your topic that takes the discussion on the field and the domain of practice or whatever you had in the previous section that links up to that and brings the specific focus and the specific context of your study into the picture. Now, we speak of two different kinds of contextualization. The one is disciplinary contextualization. Now, you've already started this in the field and domain section, the previous section, but you must bring it into the broader discipline of organizational communication. And then you must go from that disciplinary contextualization to a more practical organizational contextualization where you discuss the relevance of this topic to the organization in question. So here we give some background on an organization, sketch the scene kind of. The easiest thing is to think about publicly available information like websites or annual reports and other information that is well known and well documented online, for instance. Now, if we look at our 3 examples again, the urban crop community example, here the topic could be social media as part of fundraising and donor communication. The disciplinary context here is that fundraising and donor communication is part of PR, and social media platforms can be seen as kind of emerging channels or platforms of organizational communication. So that is how this study fits into what organizational communication is. And then the organizational context here would be the non-profit context, of course, because this organization would be in the non-profit or the civil society sector, also in the agricultural sector, and a bit of background on this NGO, its stakeholders, and its fundraising details would be part of such a discussion on the organizational context. Then the construction industry example of example 2, the topic here could be something like racism and colonial undertones in employee relations in the construction industry. The disciplinary context is that coloniality is something that is still entrenching organizational cultures, especially in the construction industry, and that transformation of this industry is needed, and therefore we must investigate these colonial undertones and colonial and racist tendencies that is still present in the lives of people in that industry today. The organizational context is almost the industry itself, not a specific organization, but you can discuss here then the industry history, some oppressive and racist angle on that history, because that is the the context you are working in. It doesn't really matter which mine is the biggest or which construction company is the biggest in the country and other background like that. It's more important to focus your background, your contextualization on what is actually relevant to your study. So here we would talk about the racist and oppressive history in this industry and employee issues in the industry as the organizational context. Then in the last example, the topic here more specifically is Black Twitter as customer feedback on branding messages. The disciplinary context is where you show that customer relations, customer feedback, and so on is part of branding communication, and then that emerging platforms like Twitter is important to the discipline, because that is the hip and happening kind of platforms, and that is where the knowledge is needed, research input is needed. The organizational context can be Absa background, Absa setting, the financial services industry, the African setting of financing and banking institutions, to give that organizational context there. Then the next section is the research problem. Now, this section counts 20 marks. It's a big section. So keep it in mind when you write that it's an important part of the assignment because it's heavier in terms of marks. But what is different from this section than for other sections, it will be shorter. We won't be able to use that sentence count or word count exactly the same, because it's short formulations, it's a list of questions, it's much more condensed, the information. So you are looking to write about 1 page, but you must ensure that the details we ask for in this section are all there, because that is where your marks will come from. So the first thing is you must formulate a research statement. Now, some people call this a problem statement or a research problem, but it doesn't really give the problem itself. It gives more a summary of what the research is going to be about. So I call it a research statement or purpose statement. This is 1 sentence or 2 where you give details, specific details. Now, the generally expected details is the time dimension of the work, whether it is cross-sectional or longitudinal, the research approach, whether it is qualitative or quantitative or mixed or whatever. The third is the objective: explore, describe, explain, critique are the most well-known ones. Then the topic itself, that donor relationships or customer feedback or what's the other one? Employee relations. And then the methods through interviews or observations or whatever your specific research methods are. Those are the 5 pieces of information that needs to be in this concise summary of your research, which is called the research statement or the problem statement. So make sure you have those details. Then your sub-issues or your research questions. Now, sub-issues are normally like formulated like your problem statement or your research statement. So it's a statement, not a question. Or when it's a question, it could be called a research question. You can read your methodological literature on how different people see this. But these sub-issues or research questions are your big purpose statement broken into smaller pieces. So when you answer all your research questions, you are able to answer your main question. So if you think of this about this in a more practical way, if you are looking for an apartment to rent, that is your problem. That is what you are doing. You are looking for an apartment to rent. Then you have to think about the price, the location, the looks of the place. So your main issue is searching for a flat. But your sub-issues of price, location, and looks are the smaller subsections that will together make up how you will go about finding an apartment. So can you see how they are kind of smaller parts, the puzzle pieces, and when they're all together, they make up the big purpose statement or the big main question. Now, you have to remember to formulate between 2 and 5 of these research questions or sub-problems. If it's a quantitative study where you want to test a certain hypothetical theory or hypothesis, you will have to formulate these hypotheses. And of course, what could complicate the matter a little bit is if you are a budding decolonial scholar, you might take issue with this way of problematizing, stating a purpose statement, asking questions, making hypotheses, setting the objective, and so on. Those are Western ways of doing research. Now, many decolonial scholars are against this formalized style of doing things. If you are a decolonial scholar and you choose the decolonial paradigmatic position for your portfolio, you might feel that this way of doing things is not for you. In such a case, you are absolutely welcome to be a little bit disobedient and step outside of the boundaries of how problematizing is done according to the criteria for this assignment, for this portfolio. But what you must remember, whatever you do, whatever path you choose, this is not about going the lazy route. You must still then argue why you are not going the normal, the expected route. I don't know whether we can call it normal, but whether you are going the prescribed route, not the prescribed route, and why you are going your own route. You must be able to provide a motivation for your choices of how you problematize, how you ask questions, how you set objectives or not. So it's not an easier way out. In fact, it is more difficult. But also remember that if you are working within a decolonial from a decolonial position, it's also very possible to use this set layout. It might even be advisable as you are still a scholar in the making. So using the old patterns, even though you are not quite comfortable with them, gives you a good foundation to later break those rules. So choose your way, but whatever you do, you must show awareness, you must show insight into why or why not you are going a certain route. Now let's look at the examples again to illustrate some of this. The first example of urban crop community. The purpose statement could be something like a quantitative and qualitative cross-sectional description of the use of social media by NPOs to increase donor funding and maintain donor relationships. The case of urban crop community. Now, there's a quantitative component here, and I decided to formulate 2 hypotheses. The first says there is a positive relationship between the introduction of social media and donor income. And the 0 hypothesis is there is no relationship between the two. And then to approach the qualitative section of the study, 2 research questions. How did urban crop community approach the introduction of social media to their PR activities? And the second, how do individual donors perceive the use of social media as introduced by urban crop community? So can you see how the 2 research questions, that is about donor relationships, and then the hypothesis is about testing whether social media has a correlation to donor income. So that is like a quantitative measurement, and then there are qualitative questions. So the primary objective here is to describe, because we are describing the donor funding the donor funding correlation to social media. We are describing how social media is used in donor relationships as well. Okay, now next example is the construction industry one. Here the purpose statement can be a decolonial critique of internal stakeholder relations in the construction industry using conceptual arguments and data collected through storytelling. Now, can you see that not all 5 of the criteria are there? That is a little bit off the beaten track, because, for instance, one thing I left out on purpose here is the idea of whether it's cross-sectional or longitudinal. Now, that differentiation is something that's important in many studies, but because decoloniality is specifically about also remembering the past in the research you do now, it kind of blurs the line between what is cross-sectional, in other words, at one point in time, and what is longitudinal in terms of that the passing of time has an effect on the research results. Now, that differentiation becomes a little bit blurred if we say the past is present, or our history informs our realities of today, and so on. So I left it out for that reason, as a show of some epistemic disobedience, but I know why I did that. So if you want to go that route, you can, but remember that you must think about the reason why you do everything you do. Okay, now the research questions here could be, conceptually, how should decoloniality be understood and implemented in the construction industry? Second, how do people in the industry experience internal stakeholder relationships in construction companies? Number 3, to what extent are our colonial past present in internal relations in the construction industry? And number 4, what can South African construction companies do to transform and ensure a respectful, equitable, decolonial future? The primary objective here would be almost a combination between critiquing, because we are clear about the fact that it is a decolonial critique, and in the second place it's exploratory, because it's new topic area and it's qualitative work. Those are the two, or the combined objective of this example. And then the third example, the purpose statement here can be a qualitative analysis of brand messaging and Black Twitter discourses relating to the Africanacity campaign of Absa in order to describe the campaign and resulting customer perceptions and explore social media as a form of customer feedback. The research questions here, I thought 4 of them could maybe represent the bigger purpose well. What did the Africanacity campaign of Absa Bank entail? So that is a description of the campaign. How was the Africanacity campaign received by the Twitter community, specifically South African Black Twitter? That is also a description, because we are going to end up with an analysis of how that reception was, good or bad, or what the main aspects was. Then, which customer perceptions are revealed in Twitter discourses relating to the Africanacity campaign? That is a more exploratory type of question. And then, to what extent are the Twitter discourses customer feedback? So there are 2 objectives here, as you heard me mention, exploratory and descriptive. So it will be important for you then, if you do 2 objectives like this, to show what is exploratory in it and what is the descriptive parts of it. Okay, then the paradigmatic position. This section should be easy peasy by this time, because we have spoken so much already about paradigmatic positions. You have a lot of reading, you've had feedback, you thought about your own favorite position and so on. So I think this section you won't find as challenging. It also counts 20 marks, so it's quite heavy, and you need to produce something between 1.5 and 2 pages of content. The requirements are set out very clearly. You must identify your paradigmatic position, declare the ontology, epistemology, axiology, and methodology that is relevant to your project, and link that to your design and your treatment of literature and data. In the specific study context you are working in, no longer just in theory as we did in assignment 1. I trust you will have all the reading for this handy, and just to shortly show you that the first urban crop community will be interpretivist study because it's qualitative. There's a quantitative component there, which is the financial records correlation between the use of social media. So there you will have to make an argument that even though there's a quantitative component, the overarching a position is that of interpretivism, is of understanding a specific phenomena, social media and fundraising in this case, a bit better. And that understanding, deeper understanding, is the bigger position. The quantitative part is just filling in some of those detailed gaps. It doesn't change the overall stance. Then the second one is a combination again of somewhere between decolonial and critical. So we can put them together and say it's a decolonial critical position, or it's an Afrocentric critical position, something like that, because it is specifically set out to critique, to transform, and it is specifically decolonial because it's looking at issues of race and racial oppression in an African context. And then the Absa campaign one is about customer feedback and perceptions. So while there is a descriptive part there, the main position is again interpretivism, because it's about understanding, perceptions, subjective experiences. Those kind of things are the main mission of this project. Then, all right, the methodology. In both assignment 1 and assignment 2, you have been through a process of thinking about different methods. In assignment 1, it was more theoretical, book knowledge. Then in assignment 2, you saw how other people did a methodology and linked it to their positions and executed it in a project and wrote it up in a journal article. Now, that is more seeing how others do it, and now you are going to do it yourself or propose it yourself. This section should be 1.5 or 2 pages long. It also counts for 20 marks, so it's also a heavier section. Now, what needs to be in the section? The first place is the methodological approach, whether it's qualitative, quantitative, mixed methods. The research design. Now, sometimes the design is not different from the general approach, but for instance, a case study or an ethnographic design, or there are other examples of this. The design has this specific name. So yes, it's qualitative research, but it's a case study design. Or yes, it is quantitative research, but it is a case study. So it could be that the research design is something different and something specific that needs to be declared to specify exactly what this research is about. Then you also have to cover the specific research methods. So surveys, interview, focus group, observation, content analysis, those are examples of specific research methods. And then for each method, you must detail the population, the sampling procedure, the data collection process and instruments, and the plan for data analysis. If you were to take my examples, the 3 examples, let's quickly look at them. Oh, no, let's go back. For the urban crop community example, it's a quantitative and qualitative design. You can call it mixed methods. It's a case study because it's about one organization. The methods is a content analysis and correlations with financial records. So that is a bit more, you will have to go an extra step to describe this method because it's not a clean method. It is, you will do a content analysis of social media to determine when social media was introduced and when certain campaigns happened, to kind of see if there's a correlation between those timings and increases in or lower numbers even if of donor funding, to see whether the two correlate. Then there's partially structured interviews with donors and staff members. So you will end up having a little bit of a complicated methodology if you want to do something like this, because it's essentially 4 different samples. A sample of staff members to interview, a sample of donors to interview, a sample of financial records, and a sample of social media content to analyze. So for each of those, you must identify the population, the sampling procedure, how you will collect the data, as well as the analysis. But on the analysis part, again, it becomes two different analysis processes, because the interviews, because they are drawn from different populations, but they will be analyzed in pretty much the same way with a qualitative content analysis or a thematic analysis. And then the financial records will be analyzed together with that specific content analysis of the social media messaging and the start and end of certain periods of social media activity, because they will be put together in a correlation analysis. So it's difficult to then untangle them into different processes. But you will have to carefully describe your plans in this proposal if you have a complicated methodology like this one. Then the construction industry example. Let's just get back to that page. Then in that second example, the construction industry one, the approach will be qualitative, but there are some aspects of methodological disobedience there, because the rules aren't completely followed, because the critique and the conceptual arguments are woven into the analysis and are not separated out. It could be seen as a separate method because it is part of the study and it is a deliberate part of the study, but it's never, the critique is, there's never one data collection without the critique or one analysis without the critique. It's all woven or built into one another. So storytelling is the interview method or the style of interviewing. And then the data collection and instrumentation for your interviews will probably be similar to other partially structured interviews, with the use of an interview guide, but specifically made to prompt your participants to tell their stories, to get to their real lived experiences of customer relations. And then you will do a content analysis of or a narrative analysis of the interview content, with the critique again woven into the analysis from the beginning. The sampling here, there's no sampling specifically for the conceptual work, because that is literature based and will come from the paradigmatic position of critical decolonial style of thinking and style of argumentation. And then the interviews, of course, will be sampled, because you didn't choose one organization. You will have to sample people working in the construction industry, probably on a purposive or a snowball style, where one person can refer you to the next and so on. A decolonial and critical style study that leans on qualitative approach doesn't need a representative sampling procedure, so you can use one of snowball or purposive or convenience sampling to get to your participants. And then the third example, the Absa one, is a qualitative approach, and there's the method of content analysis of the campaign materials and messages, and then a discourse analysis of the tweets, maybe within a specific time frame, 2 or 3 months worth of tweets, by creating a corpus of tweets that used a specific hashtag, maybe hashtag Africanacity, and then do a keyword analysis or look for discursive patterns and conversations going on in those tweets that could reveal the perceptions and the ideas of the customers of Absa looking at this Africanacity campaign, commenting on it, negotiating the meaning of it, and responding to it in various ways. All right, then you have a lot of sources that can inform you on the specifics of methodology. It's so difficult to navigate your way in a tutorial like this, because there are so many avenues you can take. It's just not possible to teach. There's no recipe for that can cover every every kind of research project. On this level, it comes down to you to read your methodological literature, to ensure that you use the correct terms, that you work in a technically correct way when you speak about methodology. So use your recommended and reserved material and ask me individually if there's something in terms of the methods that you are uncertain about. I will be happy to help. And then, of course, to end off your proposal, you will have a conclusion. This conclusion, like the introduction, you use to give an overarching view. So summarize some of your main points, and if you want inspiration for conclusions, go and read the conclusions of the articles of assignment 2 again. Read the conclusions of other articles that's part of your reserved and recommended reading and so on. So, okay, that's it for today. I think Tutorial Letter 101 gives you a lot of good details and a lot of good resources to use in your work towards your portfolio. I hope today's discussion helps you even a little bit more. Next week, I will cover some loose odds and ends, answer some questions I get from you guys, and also talk again about the practical arrangements of December and January and what to expect in the coming month or two. All right, that's it from me today. And remember to go and download those examples because I only very briefly spoke to them today. All right, happy studies. Bye-bye.